Shonen. Probably the most prolific genre of anime to this day, and it's not just quantity over quality either, at least not entirely. Shonen, and more specifically Battle Shonen, is still continuing on the wave started on by the likes of the Big Three and Dragon Ball all the way back in the late 90s and early 2000s. Sure, the genre has changed in between generations and had new success stories to pile up on the old ones, and My Hero Academia is one of those new-gen shonen successes. An anime that took the world by storm in 2016 and became the introduction of many a new fan into this world of degenerates, neckbeards, body odor and toxic fandoms. But what the hell is My Hero Academia? I hear none of you ask, as 99% of you know by now, but I am going to answer that anyway since it's kind of the point of the video. Anyway, welcome to the world of superpowers, villains and pro-heroes, a world where everyone and their mother has a quirk, or, well, power, some greater than others, except of course our intrepid hero Midoriya Izuku, because it wouldn't make for a good story if he wasn't different now, would it? A large portion of the show honestly boils down to the usual, well, that's convenient, especially in the beginning, but then again, it is a shonen, so what exactly did you expect? Izuku becomes essentially the chosen one from being a nobody with a little bit of determination, is taken under the wing of the greatest hero ever, All Might, and, as is only natural, gets accepted into the biggest and most prestigious hero school in all of Japan. Not to mention, the good guys practically always come out on top, but I reiterate, it is a shonen, this is how they are. The story as a whole is standard shonen stuff and has the same highs and lows, with basically every major trope of the genre being represented. You have the fight scenes, tournament arcs, continuous tides of different antagonists, the usual vaguely believable willpower overcomes all moments as push comes to shove, and lest we forget, friendship is magic. Besides the standard shonen problems, there is one major critique I have of My Hero specifically, and that is that the desperate and threatening situations end up not really being all they should. This is especially apparent with segments like this that end up working out really well in contrast. The villain attack from Season 1 compared to All for One's appearance and subsequent fight with All Might is a brilliant example of this, as one of them is just kind of there, while the other feels genuinely threatening. I'd suspect that the choice of color palette being mostly midday bright in the first season might play a part in it, but it's not quite everything. Early League of Villains just comes across more as mustache-twirling baddies than the eventual existential threat they should have always been. There are also those moments when the story, or more specifically, its pacing just does not work. Most of the anime can be summarized as follows. There is a lot going on with high-octane action, paced with those oh-so-wholesome and calming moments of school and dorm life, which works really well, but some arcs overindulge in flashbacks in the middle of the action, which really throws the generally great flow out the window and just ends up slowing everything down to a crawl. I say some arcs. Most arcs are chock full of flashbacks, and it does get a little irksome. But hey, at least it's funny to imagine the characters just disassociating for a good 15 minutes in the middle of everything, having their own private recap episode. As the anime progresses further, a large portion of the aforementioned, well, that's convenient, dies away and the storytelling becomes less predictable and honestly more interesting as a whole, but at the same time, the earlier seasons do tend to be a lot more solid throughout, while the later ones have bigger ups and downs, and the same goes for the characters. And oh boy are there a lot of characters. While Deku is the protagonist, all his classmates, teachers and most pro-heroes get their time in the limelight, and that is one of the greatest aspects of My Hero. Most characters get focus and at the very least adequate character building, and while this is the show's greatest strength, it's also the one thing I take most issue with, for 3 reasons. The first one being rather straightforward and simple to explain. Not all characters are created equal, nor do I like them all in equal measure, and chances are that you won't either. If there is a shonen trope, or even several you dislike, then there will be characters you will absolutely despise as they embody those tropes to the max, a problem that will only get worse when it's time for their own arcs. The second reason comes from the flip side of the coin. The villains. While practically every hero and those aspiring to be one get a lot of focus and often even entire arcs of their own, the myriad villains end up falling flat and being extremely one-dimensional, only to disappear an episode or 2 later. While this does not affect the main big bads, All for One and Shigaraki to mention a few, the less important antagonists get so little focus they commonly end up feeling either like filler content or unfinished story tracks that start out strong and kind of just end with a wet fart. Overhaul and Stain being great examples of the latter. And no, I don't mean that Overhaul's end fight was bad, as it was undeniably one of the highlights of the entire show, but the story side just kind of fizzles out and gets swept under the rug. And don't even get me started on Stain. The show tries to bring up how his legacy was this great thing affecting many of the main bad guys, while the dude himself stopped feeling relevant even before his own arc ended. The third and final reason is not so much a criticism of the system or the show itself, and I suspect is more of a personal gripe, but the sheer number of characters is frankly staggering, and as a result, much of the character building ends up going to waste as there are just far too many to remember.
Who's that Pokemon? It's
this asshole. More often than not, when the show brings back a previously established pro hero, expecting the viewer to instantly recognize them, I found myself thinking, who the fuck was this again? They just kind of blur together. Admittedly, this is by no means a rare thing in shonen, but with the importance My Hero places on its characters, it just emphasizes it to an unusual extent. Where almost all the characters shine is in the design, and much like the varied personalities of the cast, there are a lot of differing designs, some honestly better than others, but most being solid. That being said, they don't all work super well every single time, and some shots can end up looking a bit weird, while others are absolutely stunning. Especially the more simplistic characters tend to sometimes look a bit lacking, while the ones with busier designs are usually standing out far more, even when reduced into background sprites. But one thing to keep in mind is that the designs can be very anime, but in a uniquely My Hero way, so it might take you a while to get used to some of the more outlandish ones. That being said, when everything clicks in a My Hero character, the results are some of the best shonen can offer. Not the best, but they're up there. You have the blasé Aizawa, who will not hesitate a moment to defend his students, the mysterious Hawks, who is prepared to do anything for the sake of peace and justice, but at the same time kicks back and relaxes whenever possible, and then you have Endeavor, the hard ass too strict on himself and everyone around him, far too obsessed with perfection and his rivalry with All Might, only for him to eventually step up as the #1 hero and become the true people's champion that finally realizes his own mistakes as a father. And if you couldn't tell from that description, none of the actual main characters, the students, basically none of them are that great if I'm being honest, but the pro heroes have some true gems amongst them. Okay, let's talk production a bit. The music in My Hero just works. It's not amazing to a point where I would ever listen to it outside of the anime, but the pieces fit well to their selected scenes and highlight the action, to a point where many a true fan would say that they've become iconic, and even for someone like me, not bad. The animation, however, much like the character designs, is a bit hit and miss, but leaning more into the hit side of things. Now, the average scene is nothing to write home about, being the usual, although be it very charming style adapting the manga, while taking some liberties to make it smoother and more comfortable to look at in the animated format. Naturally, there are the usual cheap and cheerful background character shots in which they are vaguely recognizable, but even these don't really take away from the show. Even if some, or let's face it, most of the backgrounds are less than stellar. You could argue how this draws attention to the foreground and to the important bits, but it still won't change the fact that most of the backgrounds just look bad. And then we have those moments when the animation really slaps, and you end up with stuff like this. Overall, I'd say that, My Hero is okay. It's solidly above average, but at the same time not the greatest thing ever made. It has its moments, but it also has those what even is this bits, and not everything the show does works all that well, but it is still an enjoyable shonen experience, a good 7 out of 10, and it never really leaves you cold. Sometimes annoyed, but never cold. Quick interjection from AddedCheese here at the end. I've now seen My Hero 3 times, And while the second time was still okay, on the third rewatch that I did for this video, my experience was predominantly that of boredom, so the rewatchability of My Hero isn't really great, and that's something you might want to keep in mind. I know most people don't usually watch the same anime several times, but still something I thought I'd mention. And with that, thank you for watching. I do hope you enjoyed that. If you did, do the YouTube things of likes and comments and subscribe for more anime goodness. You can also become a channel member if you so choose. I'm kind of considering doing a Patreon because nobody likes ads, so I could maybe upload stuff there ad-free. If that sounds interesting to you, do let me know down in the comments below what would be a acceptable price point for you for that thing. Anyway, with this, I have been Cheese, and I hope to next time. Ta-ta for now.